What's up, everybody? Welcome to Mongols. This is our prediction show where we try to figure out how the Hounds may perform against their opponent in the U.S. Open Cup, the Philadelphia Union. And
Yeah, this is Justin, and welcome to another episode of Views from the Bridge, your second favorite podcast about maybe your favorite team, maybe not your favorite team, since this is going out to both audiences. But we love the Philadelphia Union, and we are looking to figure out what's going to happen this Wednesday against the Riverhounds. So, Mike, it's good to be with you, and it's good to talk about the Hounds and the Union in the same podcast, which is just crazy.
yeah, Justin, it's good to be with you too. This feels a little weird to me because you and I get together once a week just to talk about the Hounds. But for those who don't know, you also are host of Views from the Bridge that talks about the Philadelphia Union. So when this game came up on the calendar, you were like, "We have to do this. Like, we have to do this prediction show because you are probably best situated out of anybody in the world to cover this game." So with that in mind, the Hounds are traveling to Philly. What are your thoughts on this game?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm just excited about it as a soccer fan in Pennsylvania. I think this is just such a fun game. It's like I have been for those around the Mongols audience. I've been a Union fan since I don't know 2010, 2011, something like that. Right around the start of their franchise, and then moved out to Pittsburgh and got to know the Riverhounds and became a fan of the Riverhounds. And just have loved following both teams. And every year for the Open Cup, I was just like, I hope the Riverhounds draw the Union. I hope they draw the Union. I hope they get to play the Union. And we've had the fun games against Bethlehem Steel over the years, and Union too. When that was a thing before MLS Next Pro was a thing. But I always wanted an Open Cup game against the Union. But it seemed like the Riverhounds always went west and got Cincinnati and Columbus and all that kind of stuff, and we never went east for our games in the Open Cup. So I was just super excited that this game is happening. Um, I think this is a really interesting game, kind of where both teams are situated in the season. I think this is going to be a really interesting game. It could have some positive and negative benefits on both sides, kind of no matter what happens in the game. So I think that there's a tactical battle to be had. There's a cup set battle to be had, and I think it could kind of be good for both teams either way. Whether they win or lose the game. So it'll be an interesting night.
We'll get to the Hounds in a second. I'm very curious. It sounds like Philly have kind of been up and down, and they have a jam-packed schedule here that they're trying to manage through all of this. So, for those who aren't familiar with Philly, can you just sort of paint like a 30-second picture of where the team are at and your thoughts on things as we approach this game on Wednesday?
Yep. So it's really interesting. The Union, with a win this weekend, got into first place in the Eastern Conference of MLS. So they're currently sitting in first place, a couple points ahead of both Columbus and Cincinnati, and a couple more points ahead of Miami. And so, but it's been a rocky road to get there, and it's been an interesting road to get there that I think is interesting for almost every MLS fan out there who's kind of watching this team and watching what's happening. So really rough season last year. Didn't perform well. Was close to the playoff line all season, and then ended up missing the playoffs in the last couple weeks with a couple losses, and that sort of started a turnover for the team in a lot of ways. Jim Curtin, who had been the coach for, was the longest, one of the longest. I can't remember if longest or one of the longest coaching stints in MLS. Came to an end in the offseason, kind of in weird ways. Didn't exactly know what was happening. Then they finally announced that they were letting him go. And kind of after they had done all their player, recontracting of players and extensions and all that kind of stuff. And then they announced that Curtin was being let go. And so really interesting. And everybody kind of went, what is happening? They brought Bradley Carnell, who had been in the Red Bull organization for a long time, but then was the head coach of St. Louis City, their first 2 seasons in MLS, or first season and a half in MLS. They came out firing in their first season in MLS with a very high pressing, high energy, high everything, high intensity team, and did really well for almost the whole season. and then bombed out in the first round of the playoffs. And everyone kind of went, what's happening? Second season, didn't have as much luck, had some good games, but then he got fired midway through the second season. And so that's kind of where the Union found this guy and brought him in, and everybody kind of went like, "Is he as good as Jim Curtin has been for 10 years for Philadelphia?" and all that kind of stuff. And so everyone's like, "I don't know if this is going to work. I don't know if this is the right thing." And yeah, it's just really interesting. And then they got off to a really fast start again. Won, I think, 4 out of their first 5 games. Looked really, really good. Had some down times there. Ended up trading away their leading goal scorer and leading assist leader to Columbus Crew, mostly for, it seems like, financial reasons. He wanted a extension on his deal, wanted more money than the Union would give him. They decided, well, we just ought to get something for him rather than letting him go for free at the end of the season. So they traded him away. Everybody kind of went, what? And then they went to New York City and lost their first game after that trade. Everyone went, see, you shouldn't do that. And then since then, I think they've been 7 unbeaten. And so it's been an interesting ride and a road to get there. And then you referenced the busy schedule. They're in the midst of, I think this will be game 5 out of 9 in the month of May. They've had a midweek game every week. This month they played, as far as the midweek games, they played Indy 2 weeks ago in the Open Cup, and Indy took them to 120 minutes and PKs and all of that. And then they had Toronto last week in MLS. Now, or they had the Galaxy last week in MLS, and then they have Pittsburgh, and then they have Toronto the following Wednesday. So it's really just a jam-packed schedule that they're playing and trying to figure out how do you manage rotation and all of that kind of stuff in the midst of a busy MLS season. So that's kind of where we sit at the moment.
Interesting. Considering the busy season, considering the fact that they're currently sitting in first, it will be interesting to me to see how they manage this game and whether this is an easy kind of like overlook the Hounds. And I can talk about the Hounds here in a second. I think even if you overlook the Hounds, I'm not certain that it's going to not play in your favor. The Hounds, the background on the Hounds historically are a stingy defensive team. They've already knocked off multiple, I think it's now 3 in 2 years, MLS teams they've beaten in the US Open Cup. So they're no strangers to Cupsets. They beat NYCFC off for a last minute header from Beto Edric, who is a part-time center back, part-time defensive midfielder. He was actually voted as the player of the round because of that goal in the Open Cup. So we both of us have been very high on Beto pretty much all season. He's a newcomer to the Hounds. Bob has a good history. Bob Lilly, their coach, has a good history of picking players out of nowhere and turning them into good players. The issue is that the team just can't score. They did get the 1 goal against NYCFC, but they drew to Louisville 0-0. They just lost to Colorado 1-0. In their last 5 games, I think it's 4 losses and a draw, excluding the Open Cup. So they have a lot of pieces. It just seems like they're really struggling to find the back of the net. They spent a lot of money on Augie Williams of both MLS and USL Championship fame. He has 1 goal on the season. I think the last game, somebody mentioned he had like 5 touches overall. It's just they're kind of at a loss for ideas. And I think there's a lot of hope that the Open Cup and subsequently there's another tournament that the Hounds play in called the Jägermeister Cup, that gives them an opportunity to kind of figure some things out that isn't part of league play. But, fans and pundits are all kind of shaking their heads a little bit because you got to figure out how to score at some point. Last season, there was a stretch of 8 games where we didn't score at all. And then we got a few against one team, and we were kind of on a tear for the rest of the season because we had to be the best team down the stretch to just make the playoffs. And we barely made the playoffs. But it seems like the scoring woes continue this season. So I'm not particularly high on this game. I think even if, Philly were to not bring their A game because of the stretch, I'm not convinced that, the Hounds can put on another performance, especially in Philly. And the other variable is that the Hounds are already the last USL championship team left in the competition. So the prize money that we would win because of that, we've already won. The next time that we could win any prize money is if we make it to the finals. So there is some conversation of like, as an organization, do you keep pressing and trying to put out your best team during these games, or do you shift your focus back to the league? Because what is the realistic chances of you making it to the finals? And we've talked to coaches internally, and not that they don't emphasize the Open Cup, because they do, but they know realistically they have a better shot at placing higher in the championship or winning something like the Jägermeister Cup, which is just played between USL League One and the USL Championship teams, than they would against, trying to rattle off 6 straight wins in the Open Cup against MLS opponents or something like that. So I'm not particularly high on the Hounds' chances in this game. You obviously watch them very closely as well. What is your take when these two teams kind of meet on the field and how this might shake out?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because the the Union have not had a large chance of a lot of rotation, and they haven't needed to really until May. The MLS schedule was pretty friendly until the month of May with a lot of week breaks, and so they didn't need to do a ton of rotation. And so, but they did a ton 2 weeks ago against Indy. I can't exactly remember the starting lineup, but it wasn't anywhere near their MLS starting lineup. It was a pretty like B team lineup in a lot of ways. I mean, they had a few players that definitely start on the regular, but like it was a yeah, I mean their whole bench was essentially their starting roster for most MLS games. And so I do think it's interesting. I wonder how the team is going to manage this game if they bring a lot of like MLS Next Pro players up, on a short-term loan to make to play this game, to make it a little bit easier to manage as far as their roster. If they do that, I do think that gives the Hounds a chance. I'm kind of with you in the sense that after watching the Hounds for as many times as I have, I spend most Saturday nights watching the Hounds and then watching the Union back to back, and it I think the Hounds have not particularly played well in most games, but over the last couple weeks, the win against NYCFC, they managed the storm well and got, were able to get a goal in the last minute to win the game. And then they played Louisville, and I thought they played well in that game too, just couldn't score, and that one ended up 0-0. They didn't look nearly that good playing Colorado this week, which for most Union fans, you will be very familiar with Colorado and James Chambers and Matt Real and some of those guys who spend a lot of time with the Union organization as well. And so I think it's an interesting battle to think about. Um, the Union haven't had that many teams that sit and bunker against them. Because if you do that against the Union, for the most part, at least even competition level, when you do that for the Union, like you're not going to be able to score because the Union are going to sit on top of you and they're not going to let you get out of your half of the field. And so I think to play the Union successfully, you got to figure out how to get out of your half of the field, or you're just going to defend the whole game. That being said, that's kind of the Riverhound strength, is defending the whole game. And so we saw it against NYCFC. And so it's going to be an interesting tactical battle because they're kind of two very opposite teams. The Union are high pressing. They will get in your face as if you try to pass center back to center back to center back. They're going to get in your face, and they're not going to let you do that very long. And so you got to figure out how to get out of your half of the field quickly. And then you've got the Riverhounds who love to sit back and defend. And so it's going to be interesting to see how this game plays out and how they manage the game, throughout the 90 minutes in Philadelphia.
In your opinion, is the Open Cup something that Philly would actively want to chase? and try to win? Or is it something where currently sitting in first place, league play might be slightly more important to try to keep ranking up points to stay atop the East as long as you can?
Yeah, I think that's what's interesting. The As far as at an organization level, I feel like the Hounds and the Union are kind of at the same point of kind of development as a team, I guess, in a lot of ways. So the Union have never won a trophy other than they won the Supporter Shield. And so where the Hounds are kind of the same. They've never won one of the trophies, but they've won the Player Shield. And so then the discussion among the fan base is essentially the same. Like, when is the actual trophy going to come? And like, when are we going to actually win the trophy? And so it's been interesting. The Union have actually been in the Open Cup final 4 times, and they've lost all 4. And so they have not been able to kind of get over the bump of winning them. Now, 2 of those came kind of early on. The Union weren't very good. It was seasons where a lot of the good MLS teams weren't taking the Open Cup seriously. And so they got there and then just faced better competition. And like, it was like 8th place in the East playing 1st place in the West or something like that. And it was like, all right, you're probably not gonna win that game anyway. But the last 2 have been a lot more heartbreaking, of teams that they feel like they should have beat, and teams that they could have beat, and all of that. So I do think it's interesting. I think the Union want to win a trophy at some, whether that is the Open Cup or MLS Cup. It doesn't really matter. And it's kind of the same conversation at USL and MLS level. Like, so many teams make the playoffs, it doesn't really matter what you do in the regular season. And so I think that the Union definitely want to stay top 4 and figure out how to get those home playoff games. But I think they will be okay putting more into this competition, knowing that a lot of the other teams at the top of the table have the Leagues Cup coming later this summer. With the teams from Mexico and all of that, which the Union are not in that competition this year. So they have the ability to put a little bit more into this, where some of those teams might be like, we have this other competition coming up later this summer and can't put as much into this. So I do think it will be interesting to see how much the Union continue to put into this. Maybe they thought like, oh, we'll just be Indy. And so we'll put a B team out there. And so maybe they learn from that in some ways and they go, okay, let's put A- team instead of a B plus, a B team out there and see what we can do that way. So I wouldn't be surprised if they do that. So I do think that there is an element of, yeah, let's chase this game and try to win.
Yeah. It'll be interesting. I probably have sound rather pessimistic about the Hounds' chances in this game, but that said, we've had a lot of offline conversations about the Hounds desperately need something. We know that the players' sort of mental state, they're not necessarily in the best place. We think that the team has the pieces. It's just how are the pieces being laid out on the board effectively and being executed effectively. They've shown the propensity for beating MLS teams in the past, especially if the MLS teams look past them. And I think that a win in Philly and the chance to play more MLS teams would A, be a boost of morale to the team themselves, but B, also do good for the fan base. Because right now the team actually just had the first game for their USLW, which is their women's team affiliate, the Riveters, and it was a completely different style, completely sold out Highmark Stadium. There's tons of buzz in the city about that team, and you have the Hounds sort of heading in the opposite direction. So the Hounds absolutely need a shot in the arm, whether it's this game or whether it's the game coming up this weekend against Rhode Island. They need something, and they need to figure it out fast. And I think if you were able to go to Philadelphia and win, that's going to make all sorts of headlines all across the state. That, now you've got this buzz back, you have the guys feeling good, you have the team thinking, okay, look, we've just knocked off, 2 MLS teams. Why can we not go to Rhode Island and get a win there and get it all together? So I do think it'll be interesting. I think a lot of this is going to come down to the Hounds don't have the luxury of like their air quotes B team. They have like starters and non-starters, and there have been times that we haven't even really rested our starters because we started the season with a lot of injuries in the first place. So like our A guys have not really even got a chance to be on the field at the same time. So do you take the chance to try to make that happen in this one in the hopes of getting some points and maybe just getting some minutes for the guys together as they prepare for Rhode Island? Maybe. And then to your point, what kind of team does Philly bring? And we really won't know that until, what, an hour before game time when the lineups are announced. Do you get any sense of like when they start calling up MLS Next guys earlier than that?
No, because those guys are training fairly often with the training facilities are together for basically all of the Union teams, and so I don't know that there's that much of a difference when one of these guys comes up from MLS Next Pro or whatever. Like those guys probably train together all the time anyway. And so I don't know that we'll get any indication before an hour before kickoff. But it might be some of the guys that they've loaned back to be like, hey, let us have them back for a game, all that kind of stuff. So it may be some guys that Union fans are familiar with because they're actually on the senior team roster. They just haven't gotten senior team minutes yet. But like I said, it'll be interesting. I think the Union are kind of in, like you said, there's an element of shot in the armness for the Union as well. Of like, man, if they can continue to win in the Open Cup and continue to progress in this tournament, I feel like that's confidence building for them. And it is interesting because you said the look past as well. It's the Union have Miami on Saturday, and so it's like you think about this game against the Riverhounds, and your next game is against Messi and Suarez and Busquets and Alba, and it's like, all right, so which game do you take more seriously? Which game do you put more in? All that kind of stuff. And so I don't know. It's hard to know exactly what the right answer is for the Union and how they approach this game. But like you said, I mean, I completely agree with you about the Riverhounds. Like they need a shot in the arm, and they need to figure out how to win this game. But I also think like if they go and have a good performance, don't get blown out, which they don't. That's what scares me as kind of a Union fan is like the Riverhounds have never gotten, it's often in these US Open Cup games that you see the MLS team beating a USL team 4-0, 5-0. That's never happened for, most of the time it's 2-1 or 1-0 or, that's the way the Riverhounds lose Open Cup games. And so it's like they're going to take you the full 90 and you're going to have to play the full 90. It's not like you're going to be able to rest the last 20 minutes against the Riverhounds. So I think it's going to be, it's going to be really interesting how this game plays out and kind of where the teams go from here, after the game, kind of no matter what the result is.
Yeah. Give a shout out to a third podcast since we're on two, but on Houndsy, which is another Riverhounds podcast, they were talking about how if these Open Cup games against MLS teams go past the full 90, then the Hounds are kind of screwed because at that point the MLS teams can go to their bench and they're bringing on guys that from a depth perspective the Hounds just can't compete with. So I think if the Hounds are going to do it, they kind of have to do it in the first 90 and hope they get something done. Otherwise, they're kind of prolonging an inevitable, I think. I am curious before we get into sort of score predictions and how you see this shaking out, and I guess how I see this shaking out. We've seen in the past where when MLS teams are playing in the Open Cup or especially against USL Championship teams, it's not potentially the best atmosphere, especially if they're at home. Do you think Philly fans are going to show up for this game?
No, yeah, and that's been the hard thing. It's been interesting because with the Union did not play in the Open Cup last year. They were one of the MLS teams that chose the way out. So the MLS Next Pro did, and I think lost their first matchup of the tournament or something. I don't remember exactly what happened, but they weren't in it, and everybody went, this is so frustrating, and why is this the thing, and all that kind of stuff. And then I think I don't remember what the attendance number was, but it wasn't more than half full against Indy when Indy came to town, and so it felt lacking. It felt like, all right, cool. Like this is a Tuesday night. The people that wanted to be there Wednesday night, whatever it was, and people that wanted to be there were there, but like nobody who didn't really want to be there was there. And so it's like, all right, cool. Like people were into it, but not as into it as they could have been. So I don't think it'll be super full. And it's always been my personal opinion that I think these games should always be played at the lower, if there's a lower team in the bracket, they should host. And I understand that's not always possible with some of these lower division sides and their grounds, but like Highmark is beautiful and set up for that. And so it's like, why wouldn't you want that? And why wouldn't you want 6,000 screaming fans in the building rather than 5,000 people who it's in their season ticket package so they come and be a part of it? It's like,
Yeah.
it's frustrating.
Yeah, for sure. Let's do it. Let's do a score prediction. I always make you go first on the Mongol show. I guess I will go first in this one. Um, I could see this going one of two ways. I think I could see it uh, being, sort of hearing you talk about Philly, hearing you talk about sort of the clash of the styles. It sounds like the vast majority of the game is likely going to be played in the Hounds' third, and it's kind of how long can you weather that storm. So realistically, um, I could see this game being a. I know you said no blowouts either. That's the other thing. I think if this is a blowout against the Hounds, like there's even more signals that start going up and like more questions that are being asked. But I literally could see this being anything from like a 2-0 Philly win to like a 4-0, 5-0 Philly win, and like the guys just completely deflate, which you would hate to see. But I think for the sake of sort of the guys in the field, I'm gonna predict a 2-0 Philly win, and the Hounds exit the Open Cup and they focus on other things.
Yeah, I think it's going to be I think the Union are still going to win the game, and I think probably it's going to be on depth that they're going to win it. I don't think they're going to put a super strong lineup out. Knowing that they have Miami on the weekend, they're going to want to rest the guys. They're going to want to make sure that they're ready to go against Miami. I could see a slightly stronger lineup than what they put out against Indy a couple weeks ago because um, it looked great, but then they let Indy hang around for a long time, and Indy just got more and more confident. The Union probably should have scored twice in extra time to win the game, but they couldn't. And the Indy keeper was making some great saves. So I think if they don't put that strong of a lineup out, I can definitely. And that was after, extra time was after they'd kind of made their substitutions and gotten 5 guys who generally start games on the field. So I'm gonna go 2-1 Union, and I think the trick for higher division sides always in these games, whether it's the FA Cup, US Open Cup, whatever, the trick for higher division sides is you can press and you're probably the better team, but you get caught on that counter, and I think if the Riverhounds decide to go all out in this game and put Jacqueline and Augie Williams on the field, I think they get a goal on a counter at some point because those guys are quick, and so it'll be interesting. But I think 2-1 Union.
Yeah. I thought it was funny. I went to look at details on this game at the MLS's website, and it listed the Union against, quote, the Hounds, not the Riverhounds. It was the Hounds. So I don't know who's creating the information on that page, but it's great. The game is going to be Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. As I mentioned, the Hounds are the only championship team left. So we'll sort of see how it plays out. I think the game is going to be on Paramount Plus if you don't make it out to Philly. Sounds like our mutual friend Steve is coming out and maybe crashing on your couch, and you guys are going to go catch this one?
Yep, we're gonna go catch this one. For those of you views from the bridge folks, if you want to meet me, I'll be up in the Hound section in 234 or whatever it is. So come say hi and come talk to us. We're friendly. We really like to talk to other fan bases and all that kind of stuff. If you ever been to a Steel Army tailgate, you know that. So we'd love to chat and vibe a little bit.
Yeah. Justin, this was fun, man. This is not our typical
Yeah.
format. I always love, sitting down and chatting with you. We always have a good time. So appreciate the little bit of change here. I guess best of luck. You're going to be the one split here on Wednesday. So, one of your teams will win. So that's good for you. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I
No,
don't know.
I get to enjoy the game. So I'm just excited that I get to go and enjoy the game. And I just through set of circumstances like never actually made it to Philly last year for a game. And so despite living on this side of the state now, and so I'm excited and I haven't had one on the calendar yet this year. So when this game came up, I was like, nope, definitely have to go to that one. So I'm excited for that one.
I opened the show. Why don't you close us out here? And however it is you do on Views from the Bridge.
Yeah, thanks for listening to another episode of Mongols or Views from the Bridge, whichever you normally listen to. Either way, we'll be probably back later this week. Mike and I will probably have a preview show for Mongols for the game against Rhode Island this weekend, for the Riverhounds, and then for your Views from the Bridge audience, we will probably be back with our normal show on Thursday night with a review of this game and looking back at the win this past weekend. And so we'll look at against Atlanta. So we'll look at both of those and look ahead to the big matchup against Miami. So thanks for listening. Whether you listen to Mongols or Views to the Bridge, thanks for listening so much. And we'll be back very, very soon.
Bye, guys.